Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, this is my first day in Idaho. What a beautiful reception. Thank you. Let me thank Laura Petrulinus, Jerry Wixom, Ethan Wixom, the Skyline Marching Band, Lee Wan Taylor, and I want to say a word about Sierra Sanderson. It takes a lot of courage to come before thousands of people here, to come before the television cameras, and to talk about your life in the personal way that Sierra did. So I applaud her courage in standing up and explaining to the people of this country what has happened to her from a healthcare perspective, what has happened to other people. And for her to come forward and agree with millions of us that in fact healthcare is a right of all people, not a privilege. And I want everybody here to know that what Sierra just said is not something that is radical. In fact, health care for all exists in every other major country on earth. As Sierra indicated, we have made gains under the Affordable Care Act, and I'm on the committee that helped write it. I am disappointed that in a number of states, including Idaho, given the opportunity to expand Medicaid coverage for ideological reasons, governors have sacrificed the health of millions of people throughout this country. That is wrong. You know, maybe a governor or a legislature does not like Barack Obama. Maybe they don't like Bernie Sanders. But you know what? It is wrong to deny health coverage to people, some of whom will die because they don't get that coverage because of your ideology. I would urge the legislature and governor here. Let me say a word or two about our campaign. As you know, when we began our campaign about 10 months ago, we were at 3% in the polls. We were about 70 points behind Secretary Clinton. We had no political organization. We had no money. And I dare say not a whole lot of people in Idaho knew who Bernie Sanders was. But we have come a long way in 10 months. As of today, we have won caucuses and primaries in 9 states, most of them by double-digit margins. We have received 849 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. And we have a path toward victory that goes right through Idaho. Now, one of the interesting aspects of this campaign is that we have won a significant majority of the votes of young people. And in fact, by young, you know, when you get older, being young gets older too, you know. Vigorous young man of 65, wow. There you go, we got one right there, all right. You know. And we have won in most of the elections, people 50 years of age or younger, and there was just a study that came out, I think yesterday, that said we have received more votes from people under 30 than Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump combined. You know, when I was young, in my 20s, we used to say, don't trust anybody over 30. I guess that remains true today, I don't know. But I think the reason that we are doing so well with younger people, and by the way, younger people are the future of this country. And what the support that we are receiving tells me that the ideas that we are bringing forth, the notion that it is too late for establishment politics and establishment economics, that we need some bold ideas. This is what the future of America is about. And what I also find interesting is that many of our campaigns, we are taking on governors and senators and the entire establishment. And I think what people are saying, that it is too late right now for establishment politics or establishment economics. We need to rethink some fundamentals about the way this country is run. Now, I think one of the reasons that this campaign is having the success that it is we are doing something pretty radical in American politics. We are telling the truth. And the truth, as you all know, is not always pleasant. It's not something that you always want to hear. But the reality is that we can't go forward as a nation unless we honestly discuss the real problems that we face. If you push them under the rug, if you ignore them, you're never going to solve them. And that is what we have been doing. And let me just mention some of the issues that I believe as a nation we have got to address. First, it gives me no pleasure to tell you this truth, that today we are living under a corrupt campaign finance system that is undermining the democracy. Democracy is not a complicated idea. What democracy means is that you have a vote, and you have a vote. You want to vote against me, fine. You want to vote for me, that's great. That is what democracy is about. Democracy is not about Wall Street and billionaires spending hundreds of millions to buy elections. Democracy is not about candidates spending half of their lives begging for campaign funds from the richest people in this country. That is not democracy. Democracy is not about the Koch brothers, the second wealthiest family in America, and a handful of other billionaires spending $900 million on this campaign cycle to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. That is not democracy, that is oligarchy, and together we're going to change it. And I'll tell you something else. when Republican governors all across this country are engaged in massive efforts toward voter suppression, that is not democracy. That is cowardly politics. Sadly, and it's important that everybody know this, our country has one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any major country on earth. Our job is to make it easier for people to participate in the political process, to make sure we have one of the highest voter turnouts of any country on earth, not to make it harder for people to participate. And everybody here knows it is no secret what Republican efforts are about. They do not want people to be voting who will vote against them. So they make it harder for poor people or people of color or older people or students to participate in the political process. And I say to those governors, if you do not have the guts to run in a free and fair democratic election, get out of politics, get another job. So one of our goals as Americans is to empower our fellow Americans to understand that they are powerful people if they choose to exercise the power that they have in a democracy. And when we talk about this issue, I want to tell you something that I am very, very proud of. When we began this campaign, what all of the pundits and the experts said, they said, Bernie, the only way you could run a strong national campaign is to get a super PAC. We agreed with you. So uniquely in this campaign, of all the Republicans, of all the Democrats, what we said is we're not going to have we're not going to have a super PAC. We're going to go ask the middle class and working families for help. And to say that if you want us to transform this country, to have a government that works for all of us, we need your help. And you know what's happened? And this is really unbelievable. What has happened in the last 10 months is we have received over 5 million individual campaign contributions. That is more contributions than any candidate in the history of this country up to this point. Anybody here know what that average contribution is? $27. And that, my friends, is revolutionary unto itself, because it shows that you can, in fact, despite the poisoned campaign finance system we have, you can run a campaign not being dependent on Wall Street or the fossil fuel industry or the drug companies or billionaires. Now, my opponent, Secretary Clinton, has chosen to go another route in terms of raising money. She has several super PACs, and her largest one recently reported that they raised $25 million from special interests, including $15 million from Wall Street. As all of you know, Secretary Clinton has also given speeches on Wall Street for something like $225,000 a speech. Now, what I have said is that if you're going to get paid $225,000 for a speech, it must be an extraordinarily brilliant speech. It must be a speech which is mind-blowing, which addresses and solves many of the crises facing humanity. And if it is such a great speech, I think all of the American people deserve the opportunity to read it. Secretary Clinton has also said that she is prepared to make her transcripts public if other candidates do the same. So let me announce today, right here in Idaho, I am prepared to make all of my Wall Street speeches available to the public. And here they are. You got them. Now, I recognize that Idaho is a conservative state. Although it does appear that not everybody is conservative. And what I want to say, in all seriousness, to the conservative people of Idaho and the conservative people in America, that what the media tries to do is kind of divide us up and suggest that this country is hopelessly divided and everybody hates everybody else. I honestly don't believe that's true. Obviously, there are some real divisions. I mean, I, for example, am very strongly pro-choice. I think women I believe that those very personal decisions must be made by a woman and her family and her doctor, not by the government. I am very strongly pro-gay marriage. I am proud that my state of Vermont has been a leader in that effort, and I also believe, and I know it's not necessarily a popular point of view here in Idaho, that we need sensible gun safety legislation. Now, here is my point, though, and I understand that maybe a majority of people in Idaho disagree with me on those points. But here is what is extremely important to know about politics, which sometimes we forget about. Nobody agrees with anybody else 100% of the time, okay? You just met my wife, Jane. She's a little bit smarter than I am. We don't agree on everything, okay? And that's true for families, and that's true for society. It would be impossible to believe that everybody agrees with everybody on everything. But I think sometimes the divisions are not quite as deep as some would make out. For example, I would harbor a strong guess that the vast majority of conservatives in Idaho do not believe that our current campaign finance law makes sense. Whether you are a conservative or a progressive, most people do not believe that democracy is about billionaires buying elections. I would be willing to guess that a vast majority of conservatives in Idaho do not believe that America should have a rigged economy in which the top 0.1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. I think that conservatives as well as progressives understand that we have a rigged economy when so few have so much, so many have so little. I would be willing to bet that most conservatives do not believe it makes sense that today, when dad is out working incredibly long hours, mom is out working long hours, kids are working long hours, that 58% of all new income generated is going to the top 1%. I would be willing to bet that conservatives as well as progressives think that there is something wrong when the wealthiest family in this country, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth as one family than the bottom 40% of the American people. And I think almost all of us could agree that it is a pretty absurd situation when you have the wealthiest family in America paying wages to their employees that are so low that many of these employees are forced to go on Medicaid, food stamps, and subsidized housing. And this is what a rigged economy is about. Who is paying taxes for those food stamps and Medicaid and subsidized housing? So on behalf of the wealthiest family in America, I want to thank you for subsidizing them and for subsidizing their business. So I say to the Walton family, get off of welfare, pay your workers a living wage. And I think most conservatives would agree that the Walton family can afford to pay their employees a living wage. And I think most conservatives understand, as we do as progressives, that there is something wrong in this country when women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. There is no rational economic reason for women to be paid substantially less than men for doing the same job. That is called sexism, and together we're going to change that. I think all of you have probably been reading or seeing on TV the tragedy in Flint, Michigan. And I was there a few weeks ago talking to some of the families, and it literally is beyond belief that in America in the year 2016, children are being poisoned by a disastrous water system which has enormous amounts of lead in it. But it is not just It is not just Flint, Michigan. There are hundreds of other communities in this country which have troubled water systems. In my state of Vermont, it's not water per se, it is bridges which are in massive needs of repair, roads that are rampant with potholes. We have a rail system falling further and further behind other countries. Levees and dams need enormous amount of work. We used to have the cutting edge infrastructure in the world. That is no longer the case. And I would suggest that conservatives would agree with progressives that we have got to invest in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure and creating and when we do that, we create 13 million jobs through $1 trillion investment. Let's think of an America where our infrastructure is cutting edge, where we have the best water systems, clean water all over this country, high quality wastewater plants, where we have the best rail system, the best airports in the world. We can do that, and we can put people back to work accomplishing that goal. And let me tell you another issue where I think there is widespread understanding in this country, regardless of one's political views. All of you are aware that 8 years ago, as a result of the greed, the recklessness, and the illegal behavior of Wall Street, this country was plunged into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their jobs, they lost their homes, they lost their life savings. And then Congress came along and, against my vote, bailed out Wall Street. Now, one of the reasons that Wall Street was bailed out is because the banks were too big to fail. In other words, if they went under, they would take half of our national economy with them. But what people don't know, or many people don't know today, is that 3 out of the 4 largest banks that were bailed out are bigger today than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail. People don't know that the 6 largest banks have assets of over $10 trillion, equivalent to 58% of the GDP of America. They issue 2/3 of the credit cards and 1/3 of the mortgages. 6 financial institutions. I think that most Americans, regardless of their political views, understand that is too much power in the hands of too few people. We've got to break them up. And I think that people across the political spectrum understand that it is insane that we have corporations in this country who make billions of dollars a year in profit, stash their profits in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens, and end up paying not 1 nickel in federal income tax. So if I have my way, what we are going to do is end those loopholes, collect $100 billion a year, invest it in the infrastructure, rebuild America. The point that I am making is that, yes, there are differences of opinion between conservatives and progressives, no doubt about that. but on many fundamental economic issues, campaign finance reform, whether or not we have a rigged economy, there is a lot more consensus than many believe. Now, the other issue that I want to mention briefly is that, yes, we have a corrupt campaign finance system that's undermining our democracy. Yes, we have a rigged economy in which ordinary Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, and almost all new income goes to the top 1%. But something else is going on, and that is we have a broken criminal justice system. What this campaign is about is urging the American people to think outside of the box. Don't just look at the world the way corporate media wants you to look at it. Ask yourselves hard questions. Question, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, which is what we are today, why do we have more people in jail than any other country? Why do we have more people in jail than China, a communist authoritarian country that does not tolerate dissent terribly well and has 4 times more people than we have? We got 2.2 million people in jail. We're spending $80 billion a year to lock those people up. So in my view, we need in a very big way to reform a broken criminal justice system. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. I have worked as a former mayor and as a congressman and as a senator with the police departments all over my state and all over this country. And the vast, overwhelming majority of police officers are honest, hardworking, and are asked to do a very difficult job. It is not easy to be a police officer today, but like any other public official, a police officer must be held accountable. Second of all, we have got to take a hard look at the so-called war on drugs. Over the last 30 years, millions of Americans have received police records for possession of marijuana. Now, I am not here, honestly, advocating for marijuana or against marijuana, but this is what I do know. Right now, under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, marijuana rests alongside of heroin as a Schedule I drug. Now, people can argue about the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but everybody here knows that heroin is a killer drug doing massive harm in this country today. And that is why I have introduced legislation that takes marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. States have the right to legalize or not. 4 states, as you know, have legalized marijuana, but that is the state's decision. But in my view, possession of marijuana should not be a federal crime. And when we talk about reforming criminal justice, and when we talk about drugs, understand this, as I'm sure you all do. In my state of Vermont, neighboring New Hampshire, all over this country, we have an epidemic of heroin addiction. People are dying every single day from overdosing. Opiate addiction is a national crisis as well. What we need to understand is that addiction and substance abuse is not a criminal issue, it's a health issue. And that is why we need a revolution in mental health in this country. And as Sierra said at the beginning of this program, we need to make sure that health care, including mental health care, is available to all people. I want to touch on another issue, which is gaining more and more support. 100 years ago or longer, very brave, foresighted people fought for public education in this country. And what they said, it was a pretty radical idea back then. What they said is that all children should have the opportunity to get an education from first grade to 12th grade, regardless of their income. That was a pretty radical idea. Because before that, what you had is the children of the wealthy were getting a great education. The children of the working class or the poor were working on farms or in factories. And families said, no, that's not right. Every kid in this country is entitled to a quality public education. But as all of you know, in the last 30, 50 years, the world has changed. Our economy has changed. Technology has changed the world. We live now in a highly competitive global economy, and we need to make sure that our people have the best education possible to compete in that global economy. So it seems to me that in the year 2016, when we talk about public education, it's not good enough to simply be talking about first grade through 12th grade. We have got to make public colleges and universities tuition free. Now, some people say, well, this is a radical idea. It is not a radical idea. The world has changed. In many respects, a college degree today is equivalent to what a high school degree was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you had a high school degree. You know what? You were in pretty good shape. You can go out and get a good middle-class job. By and large, that is not the case today. And let me tell you something else. Other countries around the world understand this. In Germany, college is free. Scandinavia, college is free. And here's something that some of you may not know. 50 years ago in the United States of America, most of the great public universities and colleges were virtually tuition free right here in America. Now, and the other part of that equation is the issue of student debt. How many people here are dealing with student debt? Whoa. Okay. Now, again, what I would ask of you, Think outside of the box. Think outside of the status quo. Don't take for granted that what happens is normal. Ask yourself this question. Everybody in America understands how important education is. There's no debate about that. And throughout young people's lives, what they are told is, you got to go out and get the best education you possibly can. It's good for you, it's good for the country. And then people come up to me and they say, Bernie, why is it that when I graduate college, I'm $30,000, $50,000 in debt? Why am I being punished for getting an education? And those people, by the millions, are absolutely right. And that is why, as part of our legislation, we are going to give people with student debt the opportunity to refinance that debt at the lowest interest rates they can find. Now, people then say, people who aren't willing to think outside of the box, people who do not choose to think big, they say, well, Bernie, you want to make public colleges and universities tuition free, you want to lower student debt, that's an expensive proposition. They're right, it is, about $70 billion a year, it's a lot of money. How are you going to pay for it? I will tell you how we pay for it. We pay for it by imposing a tax on Wall Street speculation. Remember, why is it a radical idea to say that young people in this country have a right to get all of the education they need without going into debt, but it was not a radical idea for the Congress to bail out the crooks on Wall Street? So if the American people can bail out Wall Street in their time of need, now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class of this country. Let me touch on another issue. You know, often I am asked, which issue is the most important issue? And you can't give an answer to that, because all of these issues are hugely important. And here is an issue that is not only important to our country, but to the entire world. I am a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment. And I have talked to scientists all over our country and all over the world. The debate is over. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already doing devastating harm in our country and around the world. And here is what the scientists also tell us, and it is pretty scary stuff. What they tell us is, if we do not get our act together in the very near future, if we do not transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, this planet, by the end of this century, could be between 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Now, you may think that's not a whole lot. That is an unbelievable change in the planet's climate. And what that will mean, according to the scientists: more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more destruction and acidification of our oceans, and all that that means. It will mean rising sea levels and the flooding of coastal regions. It will mean more international conflict as people around the world fight over limited natural resources. Now, I want to again throw out an issue to you which the media doesn't talk about much, but we need to understand. How does it happen when the scientific community is virtually unanimous on this issue that not one Republican candidate for president is willing to acknowledge the truth about climate change? And the answer to that is not that Republicans can't read. They read just fine. And I'll tell you something, this is interesting. I sit on a number of committees, and all the committees, Democrats and Republicans. And we talk about health care, Republicans are there. When we talk about diabetes, when we talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about cancer, they are interested in these issues. They ask as good a questions as anybody else does. But when it comes to climate change, suddenly they cannot tell the truth. And this gets back to a point I made earlier. That is what a corrupt campaign finance system is about. Because if a Republican came here to Idaho Falls and said, you know what, I've talked to the scientists, this climate change is real, we got to do something, on that day, that candidate would lose his campaign funding from the Koch brothers and the fossil fuel industry. Now, let's stop fracking. That's right, too. I mean, and one of the differences between my Democratic opponent and myself is I am very clear. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming that fracking has caused enormous problems to water systems all over this country. We can't afford to do that. We got a potential water crisis in this country, and we've got to do everything that we can to keep our water clean. Now, let me say a word or two about the rather unusual situation in the Republican Party. And let me say a word or two about my good friend Donald Trump. Just kidding, he's not my good friend. In fact, I never even went to one of his weddings, you know, I just never did, right? But let me tell you a couple of things. You know, one of the criticisms made of our campaign is people say, well, you know, Bernie's a nice guy, he's got interesting ideas, he combs his hair fantastically. But despite that, he can never win a general election against the Republicans. So let me just tell you this. In virtually every poll that has come out in the last several months, we defeat Donald Trump, and we defeat him big time. There was a NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out about a week ago. We were defeating Trump by 18 points. Now, you don't know me that well, but if you did, what you would know is I've never run a negative TV ad in my life. I don't go around, you know, I don't go around telling people that my opponents are all dummies or terrible, awful people, and I'm the only good candidate. I never do that because A, nobody believes that stuff, and B, you know, it's just not the right thing to do. But I'm going to make an exception today. because I think it is important to talk about Donald Trump, who stands, we think, a reasonable chance of becoming the Republican nominee. And I'm going to tell you why I think Trump will never be elected President of the United States. For a start, and I got to tell you, I just don't do this often. I don't make these attacks against opponents. But the truth is that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. Now, in politics, it is important to understand, I'm perhaps the most progressive member of the U.S. Senate. I have friends who are conservatives. They believe what they believe. Doesn't mean to say they are liars. They believe what they believe. That's called democracy. But this is what Politico is, a newspaper in D.C. And this is what they said. They said that Trump, and I quote, made more than 6 statements deemed mischaracterizations, exaggerations, or simply false, equating to roughly 1 misstatement every 5 minutes on average. There is another group out there, it's called PolitiFact, and their job is to check up on politicians. And they're not always right, by the way, but this is their job. Is a politician saying something that's accurate or not? PolitiFact looked at 112 statements made by Donald Trump. They rated 78% of these statements false, mostly false, or what they call pants on fire. Really, really big lies. And again, this is not, people can disagree about ideas, but you cannot have a president whom the American people cannot trust when he speaks. Let me just give you a few examples, and we could go on for many hours. I'm going to make it short. Few examples of some of the outrageous lies that Trump has stated. He stated that he watched, quote, thousands and thousands, end of quote, of Muslims cheering in New Jersey when the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11. Well, he saw it on television. The only problem is nobody else in America saw it on television because it never was on television. It is a lie. Donald Trump said that, quote, the Mexican government forces drug dealers and criminals into this country. Last month, Donald Trump said he, quote, didn't know anything about David Duke, the former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who recently endorsed Trump. PolitiFact rated that a pants-on-fire lie. Trump has criticized Duke's racist views at least 4 times in the past. Of course he knew David Duke. 2011, Trump claimed that President Obama's grandmother said he was born in Kenya. That's a lie. President Obama's grandmother said that he was born in Hawaii. On and on it goes. But it goes beyond that. The truth is that the American people will not elect a president who insults Mexicans and all of Latin America. They will not elect a president who insults Muslims. They will not elect a president who insults women. Who insults African Americans. Now remember this. Donald Trump was one of the leaders in the so-called birther movement. And that was a very, very vicious and dangerous movement because what it was not saying we disagree with Obama. What they were saying is that what they were trying to do is delegitimize the presidency of Barack Obama by saying that he was not eligible to be born in America. And that is an awful and dangerous thing to do. Now, I have found it very interesting on the campaign trail. You know, the president's father was born in Kenya. My father was born in Poland. Nobody has asked me for my birth certificate. You think it might have something to do with the color of my skin. Everybody in this room knows that real change never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. And that is the history of the trade union movement in this country. It is the history of the civil rights movement in this country. It is the history of the women's movement in this country. People forget 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. They couldn't get the education they wanted. They couldn't do the work they wanted or get the jobs they wanted. But what happened is women and their male allies stood up and fought back and said that women will not be treated as second-class citizens. And that is the history of the gay movement in this country, where very courageous people taken on a whole lot of hatred. The gay community and their straight allies said that in America, people have the right to love whoever they want. And today we are in a pivotal moment in history. We are in a moment, in my view, where we have got to look out around this country and understand that the status quo is not working. It needs fundamental change. Please don't tell me that the United States has to be the only major country on earth that doesn't provide guaranteed paid family leave. Don't tell me that the United States has to be the only major country that doesn't guarantee health care to all. Don't tell me that young people have to go deeply into debt because they wanted a decent education. Don't tell me that the United States should have more income and wealth inequality than any other country, while at the same time we have the highest rate of childhood poverty. We can change America, but the only way we change it is when millions of people stand up and fight back. And that is what the political revolution is about. On Tuesday night, here in Idaho, you can show the world that this great state is prepared to go forward and help lead this country into a political revolution. Let's do it. Thank you all very much.